Welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. This is episode number 435, and our guest today is Dylan Dawson from onX Maps. We speak with Dylan about some of the new features that have been added to onX in the past year that Steve and I honestly just haven't learned enough about. And maybe you're right there with us. Maybe you have onX, maybe you use it, but you're not fully aware of everything it can do for you. And this episode will certainly help you out with that. We also discuss some of the common tips and tactics that get overlooked when using onX, some of the things that people do wrong, and a lot more. So whether you are a current onX user or not, there's something you can take away from this episode. As always, guys, we do appreciate you tuning in. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback for us, send an email to podcast@exomountaingear.com. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe or follow in your podcast app so that you receive future episodes automatically. But right now, let's dive into this discussion with Dylan. Well, Dylan, welcome to the podcast, man. Excited to kind of virtually hang out with you today, and I'm sure we'll see you in person here at a show soon. But before we dive into it, go ahead and give some context just for who you are, what you do at onX, that type of thing.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's been a long time coming, and like you said, hopefully we get to spend some actual time face to face here soon. So my name is Dylan Dowson. I've got I wear several hats for onX. I will say it that way. Basically, marketing manager is my title. I work a lot with our industry folks. And I'll take two steps back. So Western big game marketing as a whole is kind of what I work in. So if it's Western big game focused, it kind of comes through me. I am very fortunate. One of my favorite parts of my job is to have the relationships and work with the ambassadors, the TV personalities, if you will, the born and raised, the hush, et cetera, in the industry. So that I would say is far and away probably the coolest part of my job is having those relationships and managing those. And then once in a while, spending time in the field with them, creating content, et cetera. So that's kind of a big part of it. Everything from email marketing to, internal, external campaigns and everything in between. If it's Western big game focus, that's kind of mine. So I've been with onX for about a little over 8.5 years now. And the growth and just the company has changed so much. Like 8.5 years ago when I was started, like you knew everybody on a first name basis, pretty small as far as like employees that work there. And since then it's just kind of blown up. So things have changed a lot. We kind of went from, having one marketing team to kind of splitting out into regional and species. So mine's Western big game. I work with a counterpart that kind of focuses more on the whitetail side of thing. Same with the waterfowl, upland, the wing shooting, just to kind of have like experts, if you will, in each one of those areas. Because, if I was to speak on waterfowl, if this was a waterfowl podcast, I might be able to fake it a little bit, but definitely not very well. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of it. But it's been a cool ride. I love working in the industry, and I've always just, I've been very passionate about hunting and the outdoors and conservation and everything prior. So, it was a good fit and is cool to know and to associate with folks like yourselves.
I'm excited to have you on just to cheer you out for all the features you add, but I don't pay attention to.
Yeah. We'll get to that for
sure.
Yeah. What's curious to me too is like you mentioned how onX on the hunt side has grown, and there's these waterfowl aspects to it and like Eastern more whitetail stuff, but even outside of hunting, I don't even know anymore, but like there's onX off-road. I think onX, is it backcountry? I don't even know, but like what is onX like branched out into besides hunting even?
Yeah. I should have asked somebody internally if I can, so I'll tease a little bit because there's another one coming soon. It's one of those things I'll ask for forgiveness instead of permission. But so we, onX backcountry, onX off-road. So for off-road, think of the hunt product essentially, but way more user-generated content. As you guys know, and as everybody listening, like obviously if you come to me and ask me where my honey hole is for elk, Like, it's just not going to happen. I'm not going to give you any information. If I am going to give you information, it's probably going to be to get you further away from where I hunt, right? So the user generated content stuff with hunt just isn't there. And obviously we recognize that. We're not going to ask for that. We're hunters ourselves. We get it. The off-road side of things though, so instead of like hunt specific data, it's very much centered around trail data. Can I take a four-wheeler on this trail? Can I take a side-by-side? Is it a snowmobile trail, et cetera? What's the avalanche conditions for snowmobiling? So it's a lot more geared toward the off-roading, but then the user generated content really comes into play with that, because if you ask an off-roader, hey, what's a cool trail to hit around here? I'm new to the area. Like, they're going to pull out maps and show you exactly where to go, because like they want to share that, right? So it opened up a cool user generated content avenue for that. Backcountry, very similar. It's like backcountry skiing and navigating, the PCT and those type of trails and so on and so forth. We are coming out with another one that is going to be onX Fish, that is currently being worked on right now and planned to release this next year.
That's why I fish. I don't know, and like I'm not in that world enough to even think of that. And is user generated content. Obviously, some people are super secret about fishing holes, and I know there are people who are happy to talk about like what's happening on the water and spawn and
Yeah,
conditions and all that. So I'm curious to see where that goes in terms of how that's treated with user generated content.
yeah, no, definitely. And to be honest, I am too. One of the nice things about how the company is structured is, again, I'm very much focused on Western big game on the hunt side. So like we break it down into like what people are passionate about, like what their knowledge is in, what they're good at. Like, I have not touched that new product once. So I know about as much of it as you guys do at this point, just having heard about it. Um, but it's good because we've got the right folks working on that product. So it will be interesting too. I would imagine the user generated content probably isn't going to be as much there, because like you said, I mean, if I have a good fishing hole, probably not going to send a waypoint to everybody in the country.
I don't even know if this exists already. It may, but do you have access to all of them with like different membership levels? Like if someone subscribed to like onX Hunt Elite and they're like, oh, I occasionally off-road or look for trails or whatever, do they have access to the off-road product?
No, so right now they're completely separate. We've had and will continue to have those discussions internally of like, is there ever a time where if you get like a, whatever membership, you get access to all? Right now, they're just separate. The audiences, there are some overlap, especially with hunt and off road, um, but not enough to really justify to bundle them together, in my opinion. So, or in our opinion. So, right now they're separate, but that's always a discussion for sure.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is I was talking with Andrew from your team. Like we were having a conversation offline. It wasn't meant to be anything. And somehow or another, like the topic of features and what you guys have built into onX, but what you purposely haven't built into onX, specifically just talking back to the Hunt product now came up. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? And he's like, well, just based on some conversations we've had, like there's certain features we could easily build into the Hunt product that don't seem beneficial to the hunter from like, I don't know if I want to use the term ethics. I mean, I think that applies in some instances, but even it's just like, hey, protecting hunting and the resource and not obviously onX has changed the game in terms of how much information's out there, but when I began to think about it and think of things like there could easily be like heat maps and all kinds of stuff for like waypoint concentrations or even looking at waypoints of certain types and like there's the technical possibility to really blow things up, I think, in a negative way. And so I know that's super open-ended, and maybe you can talk in some specifics or maybe you can't, but it made me curious, like, I don't know if you can say like some of the conversations behind the scenes or like what you purposely don't put into the product or just kind of how you guys look at that. Because I think you could make the product even more powerful, but you also realize you need to throttle yourselves if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, first and foremost, I'm very fortunate. We, as like all of us, the consumers, are very fortunate that the folks that are having these conversations really think about it, and in the wrong people's hands, like there's potential for some ethically questionable things. And technology has came so far in the past 10 years, not even specifically with this, but even like you look at rifles and whatever. I remember growing up, and I'm not, terribly old, so I don't want to say that like back when I was a kid. But when I grew up, I remember 300 yards being like kind of at the edge of, limits, right? And I guarantee people back then were shooting more long distance and understanding, ballistic coefficients and all the math and everything that goes into it. But I don't believe when I was growing up there was a rangefinder that would just automatically calculate barometric pressure, temperature, spin drift, everything, and then tell you exactly what to dial, right? So technology is advancing. I mean, now you can shoot as far as you want to, like 1,000-yard shot anymore isn't that insane. So technology everywhere, I think, in the hunting space is advancing, and especially with us. I mean, like you were alluding to, some of the things that you could do on the map, we just ethically think aren't correct, and we do have those conversations quite frequently throughout the year. So do just know that, like, one of the things, for example, and I don't even know the legal terminology of this, of how this would work, but there's a lot of information out there on collared animals, right? So like just wolves, for example, like you can go find out information on collared wolves. I'm sure there's a way that we could, and I don't know this because we've never explored it, would never, but I'm guessing that there's probably a way to take that information and data and overlay it on the map to where it's more accessible, more public than what it currently is. So that's, one example of just something that, we haven't even really talked through that one, right? Because we just know that's not a topic of something we would want to get into. The waypoint thing is another, definitely something we talk about quite often, mostly because the customers, we get it, joking questions all the time. Like we'll be at a trade show and somebody will come up and like kind of nudge us and be like, hey, so where I shot that big bull last year, right? Like you have the waypoints. And they, most of the time the questions are like kind of joking, but also you can tell that there's some backseat concern there. And that's just something that we have never, will never ever consider doing, is like selling people's data or even looking at people's data to create, heat maps, like you said, of areas of concentration. Like we're hunters. If that ever happened to me, like I personally would go back to, if I was a customer and that happened, anything like that, I'd go back to a paper map and a highlighter and a compass. Like like you just can't do that, right? So yeah, and there's obviously a slew of other things, but just we are having the conversations. We realize technology is increasing in every aspect. Again, like I hear stories from older folks that, like, yeah, when it would snow in the winter, like we didn't have good enough gear to sit out there in the snow and in the rain. So like our hunting was super limited. Now look at all the options on the market as far as like keeping you warm, dry, safe, etc. Backpacks, I'm sure with you guys, like it's a different realm of technology than like we are, where it's like technology through your phone. But I'm sure, there's been pack frames for quite a while. I'm sure you guys know more of the history there. But 50, 60 years ago, I'm guessing people weren't able to throw 100, 120 pounds on their back and go hike it out, near as comfortably as what we can today.
Yeah, there's so many facets to that for sure. It's easy to throw around like technology as the scapegoat, I think, of this conversation. But as you said, it's everything from like clothing to backpacks to the weapons, of course, and technology.
Yeah, and back to real quick, like I have one of those rangefinders that calculates all that, right? So that's why it was top of mind. So I think some of it is just ethics of like, what do you feel? And I don't want to steer down the long range shooting debate, because that's a whole nother conversation I'm sure you guys have had on other podcasts. But that's just one of those things that it's a good example, I think, of like, what do you as the hunter, what do you feel is ethical? And as long as it's legal, and that's the big thing, is really, if it's legal and you think it's ethical, then go for it. Like I pull out my rangefinder, I range something, it'll tell me exactly what to down my rifle to. That's a heck of a lot easier than, doing all the math and pulling out the calculator and whatever, but it also makes me more precise. And I feel like I'm, making more ethical shots on animals in the long run by having that equipment. You talk to somebody else and they're like, yeah, if you're shooting past 300 or 400 yards, it's just that's not right. That's not fair. But I know a lot of folks that shoot better at 1,000 yards than some folks I know that shoot better at 150 because of the practice and work and et cetera they put in. So, yeah, it's interesting. Ethics is an interesting conversation to have with everything related to hunting, because everybody's viewpoint is so, we might even align on what we feel is ethical, but we might be thinking about it differently. So, yeah, it's a good conversation to have, and we are continually and will continually have it here at onX, especially when we look at features and new technology to put into the app.
Before we dive into some new features and technology, I'm curious, like for you personally, what do you find most helpful in onX out of recent updates? And I don't mean necessarily the newest, but like beyond the base, like I can see topo, I can see satellite, I can see public private, and I can save waypoints. Like the things that have been there forever, kind of the core of onX. Some of the more advanced or newer or more nuanced features, what for you personally do you like or use often?
Yeah, there's been quite a few the past 2 years, to be honest. So one of the new ones that I used a ton this year, and we're going to expand on it here shortly in the next coming months, but it's our new compass mode. So essentially what this helps with, quite a few different things, but the main thing that I personally use it for is for dropping waypoints on known locations, right? So if I see a bedded mule deer and he's across the canyon and I'm going to go make a stalk on the backside and come up over, I could be without a sight of that deer for hours, right? And then you get over there and nothing looks the same. We've all done that spring bear hunting or just anything where you're like, oh yeah, I'll just get up there and I'll find that opening right away. I'll just walk right to it. And then you get over there and you look around, you're like, I don't know if I'm 10 yards from that opening or, 350 yards. It's like, I have no idea where I'm at. So one of the cool things about the compass mode is you can precisely and pretty quickly drop waypoints. So not to like make this a complete demo, but in the bottom right hand corner of the map, if you tap on your location, then tap on it again, the compass icon pops up. You'll tap on the compass, and then as you're rotating your phone around, it has a heading at the very top. So it'll tell you what degree, like north or whatever, it'll give you the heading. And then it also puts like a ruler out on the map. So let's just say again, for example, I've got a bedded mule deer and I range across the canyon and it's 762 yards away. So then I can tap the rangefinder button and then pull it closer or farther until I get to exactly 762, and then line it up with the phone. Obviously, you're going to want to look and like use the map and the aerial imagery as a reference too. So if he's bedded under a big rock outcropping, like find that on the phone to double check. And then that yardage is exact. And then you just save that waypoint. So now when I go make that stalk, instead of wondering exactly where that deer was or that bear was after you shot it, like now you've got a waypoint reference to go to. And so that's been super, super helpful. I'm not sure if you guys have played around with that much this year or not, and kind of what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think you showed that to me back at Portland earlier this year, and I was super excited about it. And the first example you gave was great, and the other one that I thought was really helpful is you shoot something, whether it's a bow shot or a rifle shot across canyon, to go, okay, I shot 300 yards. You can basically exact same method you just described, drop a pin right there, and then that way when you get over there to start looking, if the animal ran off, to start looking for blood, you've got a really, really good starting point on exactly where that animal is standing when you shot. I think that's something to put in the back of someone's brain if they've got onX and they shoot. Like that's the very first thing you should do before you leave that place that you shot from is drop that pin. Because how many animals have been lost because someone shoots across canyon, gets over there, and I mean I've had that happen to me before a long time ago. It's like I'm walking up and down the hill 100 yards across. Like where in the hell was I at? Where's that animal at where I shot from? So that one's a good one.
I mean, it's for everything, but I've really noticed it with spring bear hunting because you get over there and everything is taller. Like the vegetation is taller than what it looked like. You see into this and it looks open. Then you get over there and it's all
Hmm.
4 or 5 foot brush that you're looking into and it looks more open. And yeah, without a waypoint and a starting reference, like you're kind of hoping to get lucky at that point, I think. And one of the biggest things I overcame, and I think a lot of our customers do, is especially when you see something and you're going on a stalk or right after the shot, you get excited and you're like, oh, let's go, let's just go, right? Well, if
Yeah.
you take, you don't want to waste any time. You want to get up there, you want to find your animal, or you want to celebrate, or you want to go make that stalk because you've been sitting for 7 days in the rain and snow and you finally found the animal you want to go shoot. So it's like, grab the pack, let's go. I get it. But if you take an extra 45 seconds, minute, sometimes tops, to really look at the map and study it. Like not only drop a waypoint on where you're going, but like look at the topography. What's going to be the quickest way to get there? What's going to be the most effective? What's the wind doing? How can you use the topography and the aerial imagery to make a more efficient stock? Like even if you spent 5 minutes looking at the map and analyzing the situation, like you're going to gain so much valuable information that you're going to be more effective on that stock, that I think you're going to save way more time than that 5 minutes that you sat there and analyzed the map and is that exactly where that animal is, especially with archery. Like you can creep up on a clump of trees or a bush, and if that mule deer's wasn't in that one, you could sit on that for hours before realizing it. Another one that's pretty cool is Route Builder, and this is pretty new. And these are all kind of Western focus. I Western big game hunt, so that's what I'm focused on. I know you guys are kind of the same. We do have a lot of really cool technology with trail cameras and whitetail folks and that type of thing. But the things I'm going to touch on here are definitely Western focus and my personal favorites. What I've used the most this past season. Route Builder is another really cool one. So you can tap on Route Builder. You can do this on your phone or on the computer. So you can tap like your location or where camp is going to be essentially. So you can mark like a camp waypoint. Long story short, you tap on one area and then you tap on another area you want to go to, and it will automatically find roads and trails that can get you there most efficiently. So again, like if I'm e-scouting an area in Wyoming I've never been to, and I'm like, okay, here's where I want my camp, drop a waypoint. Here's where my glassing spot number one is going to be, drop a waypoint. How do I get from my camp to, and this is not obviously talking like bivvy style hunting. This is more, I've got a base camp, I'm camping off of a road type deal. Um, so you tap those two locations and it will automatically find the roads and the best route to get you there and create that trail, if you will. So then you can save it. You've got a reference when you're driving in the dark or whatever. You no longer have to pull out the map and say, like, zoom out and find, if I take a right here, then I got to take a left up here. You just follow the trail that it automatically snapped and made for you. So that was pretty cool. And that kind of also ties into CarPlay. So if you're an Apple user, if you're an Android user, I'm sorry, but it is coming soon. Hopefully. So we have it available for Android as well. It just needs to get submitted and approved through the Google Play Store. That's a whole separate conversation. But for Apple users right now, if you have a vehicle that has CarPlay, you just plug in your phone to CarPlay and automatically the map it's right on your dash. So instead of pulling out your phone or whatever, especially with this new route tool, you just look on the dash of your vehicle and then the map is right there.
Yeah, I've had CarPlay pulled up with onX, and it's awesome to have that for
Yeah.
sure. I wasn't even aware of Route Builder. I'm curious, does that work offline? Like, does it, if you have offline maps saved, is onX aware of the roads and trails within what you saved offline to be able to build routes, or does that need service like pre-planned like routes?
It is such a new feature that I really should know the answer to that question. I'm gonna, I'm testing. I'm testing it in the background, so I just threw my phone into airplane mode, and I'll let you know here in a second. But
Yeah, we can come
um,
back.
yeah, no, it's a cool new feature. We are also working on the ability to extend that to um, like hiking trails and whatever, and then just show quickly based on whether it be the color of it or whatever where that transitions. So right now, for example, it will show roads, and it will show like ATV, dirt bike trails, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But as a user, right, I want to know where that road stops and where the ATV or dirt bike trail starts.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I don't have a dirt bike, then I need to know that information. So we're working on like next steps of this to where it'll show like a different color or a different gradient to say like, okay, like you can drive up to here with a vehicle, and then here's a dirt bike trail, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, there's a lot of things, cool things that we can add on to this that, it's just, this is phase one, and then we're going from there. So I did find out currently you do need cell coverage.
Okay.
You do need service for that. So it's more of a pre-planning tool before you get out there. Um, save those. That way you have them for offline. As long as you save them ahead of time, you have them for offline. And it'll show you, it's not as much of a big deal, obviously, if you're in a vehicle going to a spot, but it will show you the elevation profile just like a track would. So there's some cool things we can do with that moving forward as well. But yeah, it's a new one that I didn't realize how helpful it was going to be until I used it a few times. So I had a couple areas where I was like antelope hunting, right? So I wanted to go check out this piece of state, that piece of BLM, this public over here. And it was kind of like sporadically intertwined with a bunch of private. And so I created like a route from like where I was to the farthest away piece of public, and then figured out ways to go by all that stuff, right? So for scouting, for spending any amount of time in a vehicle, it's super helpful. And then the third one that I kind of wanted to touch on real quick that is helpful, that's super new. A lot of people don't know about it, to be honest. Like some of the new features, there's just a lot to it. You have to want to be educated on it to spend the time in it, and then that's when people find the value. And that's one of the things we struggle with a little bit is, it's easy to have like a person-to-person conversation or a conversation at a trade show with a customer and say, hey, like, here's the tool. I'll show you the power real quick. But if you get in and you learn this, like, you will be more, you're going to stack the odds in your favor to be more successful. A lot of the new things, and I think it's the fact that it's paired with technology and the phone, it's almost like scary, right? You're just like, I don't know how to use that. I don't know. That's for other people to figure out. That sounds really cool. But I pull out my phone and see if I'm on private or public and see my location. Once in a while, drop a few waypoints. So there's so much more to the product that people, if they just get in and like spend 30 minutes poking around on things, they're going to learn so much more and be so much more effective. But the other really cool thing, and this is kind of another preseason scouting tool, if you will, is Terrain X. Have you guys played around with that much?
I haven't.
No, I think I saw it pop up, but yeah, guilty as Mark and I get after customers for like, what, they didn't watch our fitting video? What the heck, but like, we're just as guilty as others. Like, you guys do the work, but people still don't pay attention.
Yeah, Dylan, to your point on like education, we at the time we're recording this, just this morning, we released our Gear of the Year podcast, and in that we mentioned onX, and Steve and I were in that podcast talking about all these things that onX could do that we were unaware of, and we were saying, I think the resources are out there. Like, I know I've seen the YouTube videos pop up, and it shows like, hey, here's the most important features before season for this year. Like, I saw all those videos come this summer, but I just didn't go look at them. So like, to your point, I think you guys have all the resources. It's just on us as the users to actually like make the most of that and get educated and try it and get familiar with it.
Well, and it's too, for us, like, it makes my job very interesting because we can never stop trying to find new ways to teach and inform the customers, not only like these things exist, but here's how to use them and here's why you need to use them. Give them like real world applications. And a lot of that we do lean heavily on the folks that we work with, like Born and Raised and Hush and those type of folks. But it's interesting, like, everybody learns differently. Some people are visual, so that goes all the way back to like middle school. How do you learn? Are you a reader? Are you visual, et cetera? So we try and cover the bases with like, here's how to use this new feature with a blog, and here's how to use it in a video on YouTube, et cetera. But it takes time, and I really feel like you almost have to show or give the value prop of like the aha moment for a customer of this. You could use this on your upcoming elk hunt. You could use this on this upcoming hunt that you have, and here's why it would be helpful. And then they're interested enough to educate themselves, right? I'm sure you guys get that with backpacks a lot. Like you get the pack and you throw it on, and then you just go out and like don't try and fit it, right? So it is an interesting. It makes my job super interesting, and like not in a bad way at all. It's good. It keeps things keeps me continually learning about the best way to get this information to our customers. But so Terrain X is a desktop feature right now. It's only on the computer, and it is absolutely worth checking out. Like for anybody listening that doesn't know what Terrain X is or hasn't played with it, it's pretty like crazy, mind blowing technology what you can do with it. So think about e-scouting. You go to the desktop version of the app, which is just part of the membership. On the right hand side, you launch a thing called Terrain X, and in here you can filter by slope angle, by slope aspect, elevation band as well. So if you're like, I want to see all the terrain between 4,000 and 6,500 feet. The map essentially is grayed out. So you can see the map, you can put it in 3D, but it's grayed out. And then what you're filtering by, it will allow that color to populate. So again, if I want to see between 4,000 6,500, it will show just that area. And then say I want to see, northeastern facing slopes, it will also pull just that area. And then you can also filter by slope angle. So I want to see between 20 and 35 degree slope. So you filter all this stuff, and it will highlight areas on the map that meet that criteria, which is super helpful. But the part of Viewshed or Terrain X that I really think is the most helpful is the Viewshed part. So Viewshed, essentially think of it like if you are wondering, okay, if I hike up to this peak, what can I see? Like what is going to be physically, what can I view from this glassing point? That's what Viewshed does. So you click on Viewshed, and then as you're moving your mouse around the map, it will highlight the area that, based on topography and the information in the map, what you can actually physically see from there. So if you're going to pull up 2,000 vertical feet in the morning to a glassing point, like I want to make sure I can see the head end of that drainage where I think that bucket is going to come out, right? So you go ahead and click on Viewshed, and then as you're moving the cursor around the map, it will highlight what you can and can't see. The only thing it doesn't take into account is vegetation. Obviously, if you're in some super dense wooded areas, which you should be able to tell by the aerial imagery, if you're in some dense wooded areas, you're not going to be able to see through trees. But based on topography, it will show you, you can see this area, you're not going to be able to see down here, which is pretty cool.
I was playing with that while you were talking. That is insane.
The other thing with the Viewshed is what I tell customers is if you want to play with just Viewshed alone, make sure everything on the left-hand side is completely opened up or is turned off. So basically the Viewshed will also take into account what you have put in for information for what you want to see for slope angle, slope aspect, and elevation band. So you can filter all that stuff out and then use Viewshed, and it's going to show you what you can see that match the criteria for what you're looking for elevation, slope, and angle, right? So if you want to see just what you can see, period, make sure everything on the left hand with slope angle, aspect, and elevation band are turned off, and then it will really pop, and you'll have a better understanding of like what you can see. So it is super interesting looking at, I use it a lot for mule deer hunting in Montana. Like I'll pick out several glassing points along a ridge system. So I'll turn on topography and say, okay, how can I most effectively hunt this whole area for mule deer? And for me, it's like finding a ridge system, finding multiple glassing points on that ridge system. So I'm not like wasting a ton of energy and effort going down through the draws and busting deer I can't see, whatever. So I'm using topography to mark potential glassing points throughout a whole ridge system to hopefully cover the entire area with my glass and walking as little as possible jumping deer. So I'll use this view shed and kind of look at, okay, here's the ridge I want to go down. And if I hike down the ridge, like here's what I can see. Oh, if I, jump down to that next saddle down there, I'll be able to see a whole different drainage than I could before. So I'm going to mark that in here as well. So it's pretty cool technology. I remember the first time looking at Viewshed, and it's just like my mind was kind of blown.
For sure. I think I'm having that moment right now. That's wild. You mentioned in Viewshed, obviously it can't account for vegetation. And one thing I did want to ask about is I've seen in the mobile app this toggle for leaf off imagery. Can you explain what that? I mean, the name's somewhat self-explanatory, obviously, but like, what is that in more in depth, and when would you use that?
Totally. So that is and was designed for mostly for whitetail hunters. It's only in specific states right now. Not anything in the West right now. It's one of those things where we're seeing how many people use it, how beneficial it is, and then we're going to kind of look for more data sets and resources that have leaf off imagery. For whitetail hunters, it's a big thing. So I don't know the states off the top of my head, but for a few specific states, if you click that on, basically it will show imagery that was taken in the winter, essentially, right? So leaf off, so you can see the ground, you can see more of the terrain, because if you're looking at an area, obviously with imagery, if it's all a bunch of cottonwood trees and all the leaves, everything's on, you're not really seeing much except for treetops. So that was kind of one thing we wanted to do to test out for some whitetail states. We also have where you can go back and look at historic imagery. So if you go to recent imagery, one thing to note with recent imagery is it is less detailed, and we call that out right away. Right on it says less detailed but updated frequently. So you're going to want to zoom out a little bit. You're not going to be able to zoom in and see, like, is there water in that wallow or in this little spring, right? Not that type of thing. But if you're looking for, is there snowpack still up where I want to go bear hunting in the spring, or is that came off? You can go to recent imagery, and then it will give you a date range of when that imagery was taken. So right now I'm looking at the most recent possible, which is November 12th to the 26th. And what is today? December 6th. So from this imagery was shot from November 12th through the 26th of the same year. And then you can scroll back too. So like I can jump back to October 9th to November 12th, October 15th to the 29th, and just scroll all the way back. And I believe we have all the way until May or so. And then as we move forward, we will continue to keep that. So in a year, for example, you'll be able to go back a year and a half and look at what was the imagery like, or what was the snowpack like, what was this area like pre-burn, or post-burn, etc., and kind of see the landscape change. So again, it's not as detailed, it's not as crisp and clean as the imagery we normally offer, but it's super frequent and it's really helpful for those sorts of things.
It's going to be pretty fantastic for just spring bear hunting references. First thing that comes to mind, like when traditionally is the snow melting in this area, things like that.
Yeah.
No, definitely. And especially if you're going out of state for it. For me, like a lot of the places I spring bear hunt are relatively close to home, right? So if I go up there and it snowed in, like, yeah, I'm slightly annoyed, but I didn't waste, a ton of time and effort and money. Now that we have this, I'm obviously going to check ahead of time, because then it will save some frustration. But, especially if you're going out of state or anything, you can now check that. Like it's just built into it. It's super helpful.
So the primary imagery, like the higher resolution stuff, the satellite imagery you're seeing by default in an area, is there any way to know when that is from?
Not right now. We've had conversations about trying to get that information and publishing it. The problem with that is it's so inconsistent. Like there's not a one date fits all for the country, right? There's areas of the country that get flown with imagery way more frequently than areas that don't. Unfortunately, the areas that we like to go, the people listening to this podcast and us, are the areas that typically don't have as up-to-date imagery as some others, right? So, this isn't an area of expertise for me, but talking with some folks internally, I know for example, like metropolitan areas have more frequent imagery and it's better, right? We're not interested in that. We're interested in the backcountry stuff. So we're constantly working on our imagery resources and like what's the next best option and how do we give that to a customer at an affordable level. Like there's some options out there and some imagery that would be potentially a little bit better, but it would come at such a huge cost that we can't justify raising the price to the customer in order to justify a little bit better here or a little bit better there, because that's ultimately what we'd have to do. So it's always a constant battle of like, what's the best and how do we deliver it to the customer without, charging a whole bunch more for the product.
Isn't that
I ran into that
now? Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I ran into that. I was elk hunting a spot this year, and there was a fire from 2018 or 19, but it wasn't showing up. And I can't remember if it was either wasn't showing up on onX or wasn't showing up on Google Earth. Can't remember which one it was. But anyways, yeah, same deal. It was just kind of old imagery, and you get there in person and go, oh, this isn't what I was expecting. So probably important to like turn on your fire layers as well when you're looking at imagery and make sure it matches up with what you're seeing.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Isn't there an imagery? What is it? Oh, imagery on demand. So that's like a purchase option to get more updated satellite imagery, Dylan, in the app?
Yeah. Yeah. So that one is new also, and it's super interesting. It is an additional purchase. It doesn't come with a membership, just because it costs us, X amount of money. Essentially, we're not like making money off of this. We're basically covering our cost for it, but it's a really cool offering for the customer. So essentially, if you want a image shot, a lot of again, this is kind of more whitetail, but there are use cases for us Western big game hunters as well. But let's just say you have a 10-acre spot where you whitetail hunt, you want, photos of it in the spring, summer, winter, fall, or you want to take an image of the area before you're going out there. You can go to that imagery on demand, pay for the image to be shot, and then it will be delivered to you. It will only show up on your map, so it won't go to everybody's, but it's going to be an image within the last, like, I think it's a week to 2 weeks, what we say, but oftentimes it's much more closer, and it's better resolution than the recent imagery that we were just looking at. So one of the use cases that I think is pretty cool, I haven't done this myself, but I could see myself doing it, is if I'm going to go out of state and I've got all my e-scouting figured out, I want to go to this trailhead and I want to hike in here and I've got all this planned out, right? One of my main questions is, like, what type of traffic does that trailhead get? Is it crazy? Is there horse trailers? Am I going to compete with horse trailers? Am I going to compete with a whole, whatever? So, like, let's just say a weekend before you go, if it's in season, I might want to time it to where I shoot an image of that trailhead area. That way, when I get that image back and it's on my map, I can zoom in and say, man, there's 8 horse trailers at this trailhead right now. And that was shot, here's the date it was shot. So that was last week. That's a ton of pressure. Maybe I don't want to deal with that. So that, or a situation like, is there water back in this drainage? There's a water hole. I can see that on the map, but is it full? Like, am I going to be able to A, get water there, or B, like, is that going to be part of my hunt strategy, is that there's water in this area? I know for me, even in central Montana, like, this year was pretty good. Last year, there was no water in any like ponds or anything that I typically, find elk around. It was a drought, like no water to be found. So all the areas that typically held elk because there was water in that area, like all of those were bone dry. So had I have taken an image of that a couple weeks prior to me going out there, I would have known, okay, like everything is dry this year. Is there any cattle tanks in the area that I can, look at for water for elk hunting or whatever? So it's, it's one of those things that's probably not going to be super beneficial for everybody. But that imagery on demand is pretty cool for the right things.
Is that a flat rate per image, or is it just vary depending on the area that you're asking?
Yeah, no, it is per image, and you get quite a bit with it. I can't remember exactly the parameters of it.
I was just
It's
Googling
not,
Dylan, so I
it's,
have the details. You guys
yeah.
have great information
Um,
on your website. It's a 4,000 acre image, uh, delivered within 2 weeks, and it's 59.95. It's crazy. Like you're essentially paying a satellite to actually go take an image for you. That's wild.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. And, some people look at that price, and again, we're not, I can assure you, we're not making money off of this. This is just, here's what it costs us, and it's a cool thing, so let's do it. So some people, you look at that $60, and to me, my knee-jerk reaction is probably like, I'm probably not going to use that much as a customer, right? But again, if I want to know, if I'm not going to drive 5 hours to a trailhead to see how busy it is or what I'm competing with, $60 all of a sudden doesn't seem too bad, right? Like, what's 10 hours of driving and whatever, $200 and $300 in gas, all of a sudden 60 is like, that's not terrible. So and it's cool that it's only on your map, so you can see it on your map. You can toggle it on and off depending on if you want to see that or the other options. So yeah, just a cool additional, we can do this, and it's a value add for the customer, so let's do it.
I mean, and 4,000 acres is a solid size too. It's not like it's just a tiny little pinpoint.
Yeah. Yep. So I know we do have layers like you were alluding to, Mark, or I think Steve, of like the fire layers. So you can see where historic fires burning, whatever. We also have one for timber cuts. So if it's on national forest or areas like that, as long as that information is given to our data resources, we actually show where the timber cuts are. And if you click on them, it'll say if it was a thinning or a clear cut, whatever. But in areas that are actively being logged, like we might not have super quick information on that. So spring bear hunting, I can think of it in Oregon because I spent a little bit of time over there with born and raised. Um, if it's being actively logged, this would be pretty helpful to say, like, where are they at right now? Like, how far have they logged or whatever? Um, I think Trent even made a joke that as somebody who's like managing a logging operation, it'd be super interesting to shoot these images just to like check on the progress of like every 2 weeks what is being changed, right? So definitely some unique use cases for it.
Yeah, for sure. I was just curious. I was playing in the app too. Like, what is 4,000 acres? If I start drawing, and you guys have an area shape tool, so you can start drawing a shape and it tells you the area. So it's like, I mean, using super rough numbers, if you took a square and made everything between 2.5 to 3 miles, so each leg of this square is between 2.5 to 3 miles, that entire area contained within is roughly 4,000 acres. So that's
Yeah, and I
a
mean
reference
one,
to that.
a square mile for reference is 640. So it's,
Okay, there you go.
that's
Yeah.
that's a good, like, for me, for anybody out hiking in square miles, especially where it's like fenced off, it's like I know what it's like to hunt a single section, and so you put multiple of those inside. So that's 640 acres is a section.
Does offline 3D exist yet?
Not yet. So working
Not yet.
on that capability does not exist yet, and it's one of those things like we talk about technology and how things are changing. We're working on those type of capabilities, but I
Hmm.
don't really know what's going to come first. The technology for us to be able to do that, or cell phone service everywhere, right? Like
Mm,
Mm.
we're
Yeah.
so used to hunting areas that don't have service. Like that's why we have inReaches and other devices for that. We can't predict the future, but I feel that, in our lifetime for sure, there's going to be a point where you don't go anywhere without cell service. Like maybe if you get to the
Yeah.
bottom of a nasty drainage in the backcountry, right? But, um, it's one of those things that would kind of make our life a little bit easier and whatnot, is if people just had service more often. That's always a catch 22 of like, I like not having service on some hunting trips and camps, but
1,000%.
for
Yeah.
this, yeah. So it's like you don't want to turn your phone on. Once in a while, I'll get to a spot and check the camp and be like, yes, no service, we're good to go, we can camp here. But um, yeah, it's interesting. We are working on those type of things because 3D is awesome. especially with the improvements we made last year. We also have 3D exaggeration, which is another thing I used a lot this year. Um, One of the things that's really cool for me to see with the company, like taking 10 steps back, is, you know, again, I've been here 8.5 years, and we went so many years just like building stability in the product and not necessarily coming out with like super cool new features. And for a while there, it was like, oh, we got to come out with these new things that are cool, and, you know, elevation bands and all this fun stuff. But we did, and I won't say we, like me, I'm on the marketing team. The engineering teams and everything did the right steps to build the product to where it can scale and be effective and not crash and not leave people stranded in the backcountry and just work, right? So we built like the base, and now we're adding these cool new things. So in the past year, we put out more features than probably the last four previously combined. And so like 3D exaggeration is just another one of those things to where if you're in the mountains, 3D is great. Like it works, whatever. Sometimes still you look at 3D and then you actually get there and you're like, oh man, like this is way bigger than I thought it was going to be, or what it looked like on the map. Um, but especially areas like, you know, central Montana or areas that aren't super mountainous but definitely have topography. If you turn on 3D in those areas, you're just kind of like, meh, it's just underwhelming. But if you use the 3D exaggeration, it's got a slider bar to where you can slide it over or back depending on how much you want to exaggerate it. You definitely can get it to a point where it's very cartoonish, of like way too exaggerated, right? But what I find is like areas that have topography, if I go like a quarter to a third of the way up, it pulls up that 3D just enough where it's like, okay, that actually looks very comparable to what the landscape looks like. Or in the mountains, if you pull it up just a little bit, it's like, okay, now it looks a little bigger and it's probably a better representation of what it actually is like. So when I get there, I don't look up at the mountain and say, "Uh-oh." So it's a super cool new thing, and you know, for whitetail hunters, again, like you're not dealing with big elevation changes. You're dealing with a 10 to 15 foot creek bed that is making a funnel. So a lot of those folks are using it too and exaggerating it way more than what we will, and then seeing, oh, there is a depreciation here and here and here, and they converge here. Like that's a good pinch point. So that's the 3D exaggeration I've used a ton this year. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that I think that Google Earth had something I used a long time ago. It was the same thing you're describing. I think it called aspect ratio. And I'd
Yep.
over the years, I figured out I'd do like 1.4 on it, and that matched more what I saw when I was actually in there, up there in the mountains. That's a really cool feature.
Yeah, and it's cool because obviously I work at onX, so it's my job to tell people about these and explain it. But first and foremost, like the reason I am in the position I am at onX is because I'm a customer first. Like I use the heck out of it for my own personal hunts, and I would whether I worked here or not. So I'll get off on like these tangents of all these cool things, and it's like it's less of like, oh, I work here, so it's my job to educate people, and more just like it's awesome and I use it, so I want people to use it too, and to see the value in it. And that's where, you know, if you have a one-on-one conversation with somebody at a trade show, for example, and hopefully podcast too, but if you can like show the aha moment, they're like, oh, I'm going to invest some time and learn this because it's going to make me more effective. Whereas if you just create new things and put out some FAQs and video, like hopefully people check it out. But I would say almost everybody, not everybody is in every single person, but a vast majority of our customers use way less than 10% of the product's like capability.
Hmm. Yeah, that's me. I know that
Yeah.
for a fact. Yeah.
Yeah, right there. Are there common mistakes you see people make, Dylan? Like, again, in context for backcountry Western hunts, whether it's something to do with offline mode, whether it's something to do with, I don't know, battery management, what have you. Just like, is there anything that comes to mind kind of in that regard of you run into somebody at a trade show or you hear if somebody calls into support and they're like, oh, this, didn't work because X, Y, or Z. And it's like, oh, we actually just, didn't do this, right? Or
Yeah.
made that mistake.
Yeah, you hit on two of them really well that I'll dive into. So the battery management one is obviously a big thing. And if you're doing hunts like you guys do, where you're out for 7 to 10 plus days or whatever, and living out of your backpack, incredibly important. I always have a battery charger pack in my backpack at all times. Like, it does not leave the pack ever, because if it leaves, I'll forget to put it back, and then I'll end up in a situation I don't want to be in. So I always have a charged up battery pack with. I know some folks, especially you guys, would probably have a lot more to say on this for doing those more extended backpack hunts. But like solar, like a small solar panel to charge that, etc. But the biggest thing is just put your phone into airplane mode. If you don't have service, if you're not checking emails, if you're not expecting text from home, especially if you don't have service, like put your phone in airplane mode, and it will save a ton of battery, like so much battery, because not constantly searching for a signal. The other thing too is, it seems obvious, but I know a lot of people don't do it at night. Like, put that in your sleeping bag. Don't leave your phone laying on the ground when it's going to be cold, because the cold is what seems like just completely sucks the life out of a phone. So wrap it in your sleeping bag, wrap it in a puffy, something, just keep that phone warm. The other thing too is, I love tracking myself. Like, I love having the tracker on onX. Like,
Oh yeah.
it is so helpful. But if your main goal, if you're going out for 10 days and you don't need to be tracking at like at any particular moment, like, yeah, track yourself where you need to. But if not, don't just have that track running in the background, because that will also burn up some of the juice of your phone. So, there's areas where it makes sense to track. There's areas where it's like, I don't need it today because I'm going up to the glassing point and I already have a track too and whatever. So I'm going to just not turn it on right now. So those are some things with that. One of the biggest things too, and it's still we talk about education, and this one stumps me a little bit, because we harp on this so much, but folks still forget to save maps ahead of time. So it works, flawlessly without cell service, but you have to do your due diligence and save the area that you're going to ahead of time. And a lot of folks either don't know to do that or forget. So just having those areas saved, so when you get out there. The other one that we get a lot in customer service, and I actually started in customer service. Like, I did customer service for 2 years. At the time, I was the one and only customer service person. So if anybody would have called, between 8.5 and 6.5 years ago, like, you talk to me. And so one of the other things that we got then and still get today is people just inadvertently turning on layers and then not knowing what's going on with their map. So if anytime somebody pulls out the map and it's like, has like a blue haze, or just it doesn't look right, they'll call and say, it's broken. It's just like blue. Right away, that tells me, like, oh, go to your layers, find the roadless area layer, turn that off. And they're like, oh yeah, I fixed it. So I think a lot of people think they're going to break the app. Like, you can't break it. You can turn things on and off, touch all the buttons, play with everything. Like, you're not going to break it. So if you are ever in a situation where it's like, yeah, the map just doesn't look right for some reason, you probably accidentally turned a layer on. So go back into your layers, find which one's on, turn it off. There's so many layers and so much data. Like, there's, crop layers, for example. You can turn on the crop layers and then individually tap on the crop to see what was planted there last year. But you could also go in and say, like, I only want to show alfalfa, hay, corn, and soybeans, right? And then it just shows that on the map. So, if you have every layer on and zoom out on the map, it's going to look like, just a splattering of so much information that it's almost too much. Go back into the layers, start turning layers off to figure out what you want on and off.
I'll second the running tracks. I started doing that this year. Elk hunting, when Cody and Strand were out for a week, and Strand was doing, I was like, oh, that's cool. So I just started doing it every day. That is invaluable information. Like, just over the course of a week, seeing where you hunted, where you didn't hunt. I going back to using the compass mode post shot, like, immediately, if you're not running tracks, the second you shoot, turn on compass mode so that you're tracking. If you get in a blood trailing situation and you have to get into a gridding, like, you lose the animal, to be able to run those tracks and go back and look at that. Like, well, what area did I hit? What area did I not hit? People are going to find animals strictly because of that feature.
So much more. And the tracking is cool because it also I've got several tracks saved where it's like, this is a horrible route. Like this route sucks. So I'll save that track, but mark it like red or change the color or something. It's like the
Uh-huh.
track's still there, but I know like, hey, I hiked up this drainage once. Do not ever do it
Don't do it.
again. So like I'll save those and like add notes or change the color or whatever. So it's as valuable to me like finding ways I don't want to get into an area as finding the one that I do. I mean, I'm sure we've all done it before where you're coming out packing out an elk or whatever in the dark and you're just suffering over deadfall, all over everything. And then you see that area in the daylight for the second trip, and 10 yards above you, there's a beautiful game trail, like the whole way. Like that's happened multiple times for me. And then it's like, sweet, turn my tracker on, walk that game trail to the side hill and save it. Now I can go in that area in the dark and know I'm not going to deal with, 45 minutes extra of blowdown and just beating brush.
Yeah.
So the tracker is super helpful. The other thing too, you mentioned like blood trailing. We've gridded out before looking for an animal, and like I've got my tracker on, Mark has his tracker on, Steve has his tracker on, and Zach has his tracker on. Well, it's super helpful individually, but when you have service and you can share those tracks to each other, I'll save mine in blue, you save yours in yellow, then red and green or whatever to have different colors. And then you share them. And so now on my map, I have all, four of our tracks overlaid. So now I know where you guys have walked, so it's like,
Mm.
it really just paints a picture of, where else can we grid or what else can have happened situation. Because you're not just looking at where you walked, like you can share those, you can share waypoints with each other. And to see those, especially with different colors, is super, super helpful.
That's awesome. So many different ways to use the product.
Yeah, I just thought of one other use case real quick with the sharing tracks is, if you, especially if you have service, but even if you don't, and you've been into an area, like you can send a buddy a track and a waypoint to get into camp and just say, yep, follow this in the dark, like otherwise you send a waypoint and they're taking a obscure way to get into that camp or whatever. Like it's super nice and handy for that. Like meet me here. Here's a track on how to get up to that glassing point, and then they can just follow it.
This may open up a can of worms, and I know we're about out of time. Quick tips or strategies for managing all this data. So like old tracks and waypoints and colors, and there's folders now, which I still don't think I've used, but any of your like favorite advice for that type of thing?
Yeah, so I'm not as good on this as I should be either, at all. But the folders are so beneficial. Like, and we made it to where when folders first came out, you had to individually add waypoints and tracks and shapes and all these things to the folders. But it was like, as somebody who has, well, let me just see here, as somebody who has 1782 waypoints, I'm not going to 1782 times individually add that to a folder. So what we've done since then is you can add content to a folder based on like what you're seeing on your screen. So I mean, even if I did by state, right, that's a pretty zoomed out, there's a lot better ways to do it than that, but I could zoom out to Montana and then add everything that's in that state to the Montana folder. um, you can do it by species, by game management unit, by areas, etc. There's so much to it, but the folders are so valuable, especially when you get a lot of content on your map, because then you can just turn a folder off and on. So if I mule deer hunt and elk hunt the exact same area, and then my map becomes a little cluttered, well, I can have a mule deer, GMU whatever 270 folder and an elk GMU 270 folder, and then turn those off and on the screen depending on what I want to see. So it really, really helps you manage those. There's so many different unique ways to do it. Um, and it's also helpful too that you can sort. So like if you use different colors for waypoints, yellow for me for waypoints is areas that I want to go to, I'm interested in, but I've never stepped foot there. So whether I'm driving through a new area on an interstate and look up and be like, oh, it looks pretty elky up there, or I'm e-scouting, all those are yellow waypoints. So with sorting, I can sort and I can only show yellow waypoints on the map, and then I can pull all of those into a folder, for example. So there's a lot of there's a lot of different ways to go about it. Like us three on this call would definitely go about it three different ways, depending on how you're organized or whatever. but the folder system and the color coordinating, and even like the custom icons, like I think we've got like 40 some different icons, from like glassing points to camp to whatever. You would be absolutely shocked at the number of people that only use Red X, like never have changed like a waypoint to a parking or a backpack or a shot or blood, or like we have so many custom waypoints, icons, and the coloration that goes into it. And a lot of people still just drop a waypoint with the Red X, and that's totally fine. It's just not using it to as full as capability. Like I'm zoomed out looking at a map right now, and I've got shed waypoints, I've got truck waypoints, I've got camp waypoints, I've got elk waypoints, wallow waypoints. So the Red X's mean something to me, because it's not just a standard Red X. If I didn't hunt this area for 5 years and I looked, I'm like, what the heck was I thinking when I dropped that waypoint? Like, what is of interest there? Some of those I'm sure I'd remember, but if it's a wallow waypoint and it's blue for water, and I click on it and it has a picture saved to that waypoint of the wallow in 2017, and then a note that says like 2017 wallow full of water, heavy use. 2018 underneath it, I've got a note that says no elk in the area, the wallow's dry. 2019, I've got a note in there. So like you can save notes, you can add so much more information and context to the waypoint. So I would say do that, and then the second step is organize it as best as possible through the folders that you alluded to.
Great stuff, man. Is there, I mean, I feel like we've covered so much. I personally want to go spend some time in the app and dive more into some of what we talked about, but is there anything else like from your end that you want to make sure we hit on, touch on, mention?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered quite a bit. And yeah, I would just say for anybody listening, and you two specifically, just feedback. Feedback is great. Like, man, I wish this feature did this, or it'd be really cool if you guys thought about doing this. We really, really do listen to our customers a lot, and a lot of the things that we end up building, whether it be feature wise or trying to get more data on or whatever, is because we, as the hunters that work at the company, are using it and thinking about those things dynamically, or coming from folks like yourself of like, man, this feature's cool, but have you ever thought about doing this? Or I would love to see it do that. So keep the feedback coming, and I just say get in and learn it. Like, you know, we've talked on it quite a bit, but if you educate yourself on these, if you spend like 30 minutes and just poke around and touch things in the app and touch buttons and add waypoints and delete them and figure it out, then come season, you know, it's like, I'm sure you guys have had some calls mid-season where customers for the very first time are trying to, you know, pull the pack apart or something, or load meat on it. It's like, do that stuff ahead of time. That way, when you get out there, you can be the most efficient and effective and have the best, you know, season or hunt possible. And it isn't too difficult to dive in and to learn some of these things.
Well, that's a wrap on this one, guys. onX is such a powerful tool, not only on your phone for your hunts while you're in the field, but if you've never gotten on and explored onX on the desktop via your computer, it is great for pre-planning, e-scouting, and more. So give that a shot if you haven't yet. Once again, guys, if you have anything for us, just send an email to podcast@exomountgear.com. And if you are enjoying the show, it would help us tremendously if you could leave a rating or review in whatever podcast app that you're using. It should take just a few seconds to do that. So if you don't mind, go ahead and do that right now as we wrap this one up, and we'll talk to you soon.